I just want to, hello, Breaking Brown family, your Black World family. But I think I think there's a lot to be said. We've seen the Rolling Stone article, the Vox article, that both said that Obama is, one of the most consequential presidents of our time, of our era. So I think, we should dive right into that. Yeah, I think so. I think the problem is, yes, we're there like we really think like, you know, Steve Harvey did it, I can do it. Oprah did it, I can do it. And we didn't understand, like, first of all, the percentage of black people who, came from poverty, and you said something that was very interesting. You were like, before we did, you were like, poverty not creating wealth, like how rare that is. And not only is the door closing for that, but it's like the door was really small anyway. It was only it was kind of cracked open anyway, right?
5% have $250,000. And so, like, when you start dealing with 95% of Black America not having access to capital to really support those dreams, they have to start getting honest with themselves. And then on the other side, when you look at white America, there's like 80 million homes, and almost 30%, like 20 million homes, have more than $350,000. 20 million homes. That means there's whole neighborhoods of people who can, like, pool money, who can create business, who can support each other. And so, like, we got to start looking at this board, the financial board. And these numbers come from the Federal Reserve. These are not numbers that I pulled out. They're from the Federal Reserve, and you should be aware of them. And so, like, and then when you even come to millionaires, it's like 9 million. There's like 8 million white homes with more than a million for. And so, like, and up to a large amount. And so, like, when you start dealing with when there's 8 million homes, there's whole neighborhoods of like white families with $1 million. And that means that they have money to donate to campaigns locally. That means that they have money to put into school districts to control their own destiny in the same. When I started looking at focusing the conversation on President Barack Obama, I think we have to have that kind of understanding of the board. Now, President Barack Obama has been an interesting president, and he has had these accomplishments that on a broad sense, but then for Black America, in many ways, things have missed the mark. And I wanted to kind of get to you, and then I'll segue in my position on it.
Well, it's very interesting, in terms of the way Barack Obama just kind of, I don't even know how to at this juncture explain it. The way he kind of came in here, and I think I don't know. I think, again, you had the best analogy in terms of, black people paid the most for the movie and didn't get to see it. That was, I mean,
yeah,
I think
yeah,
when I
yeah.
heard you say that, I was like,
Let me explain that analogy. I was telling this to her earlier. So, like, effectively, the argument with Obama that most people have made, I've heard, to justify it to themselves is, well, he's everybody's president. He has to do things for everybody. And what I said is that when you pay for a movie, especially, let's make it a concert, and you pay for the prime seats, you worry about the softness of your seat. You worry about the sound and how you hear it. You're worrying about your eye line. Now, you also, as a result, share in other people's, like, experience. As a result, somebody gets loud in the theater, you don't go to the usher to make it quieter for everybody else. You go to the usher to make it quieter for yourself, and they share in that. Well, in this case, what Black America has used as a justification is very much equivalent to if you paid the highest price for, like, a movie or a concert, and then you get to go in, and then you were outside, and the movie was good,
Yeah.
and then people are coming out, and they telling you the movie was good, and you shaking their hand, and then you like, well, at least the movie was good. And I really do think that when we start looking at Tavis Smiley, when we start looking at Cornel West, and we start really looking at this criticism, we have to look at our own families as well and see, is this criticism real, even in application of my own life? And if it is, what happened where you didn't get many of the things in your own life delivered upon?
But I see, like, I have seen it quiet down. I will say that amongst the black supporters of Obama. But there's been this whole, like, misunderstanding in terms of what was politically feasible. I remember I had Bruce Dixon at Black Agenda Report gave me an example in terms of people always talk about, well, what could he have done differently? And he was talking about basically, you even in terms of even in terms of stuff that's just what he talked about. You could have taken over when you took over like the auto companies. You could have made the guidelines for fuel efficiency better. And you had a captive industry. You have these postal cars and all that stuff. Like if you really believed in the stuff you were saying, you could have done something. And that applies to black people too. Like if you believed in this stuff, people don't understand. Like a lot of what Obama did was unilateral stuff. When you talk about HBCUs and what he did when he came in terms of Pell Grants and that rule, which cost HBCUs millions, which they tried to backtrack on when Obama came up for re-election. But when you look at that rule, that was unilateral. That wasn't anything that Republicans forced him to do. When you talk about the pay freeze, when you talk about him freezing the size of government or whatever to save money when he came in, you have to understand that wasn't anything. And a fourth of federal employees are black people. A fourth. When you look at that, he did that. That was a unilateral decision. That wasn't anything that Republicans forced him to do. So for me, the big thing is not he didn't even when I look at Obamacare, like you talk about, well, more black people have health care now. It's just like dude, this dude came in, with on his agenda with like this Republican hybrid and all this stuff. So I mean I don't see anything in terms of black people.
And it's a trip because similar to that, I had a very long conversation with Byron Allen. Those that are familiar should look him up. Man is worth hundreds of millions of dollars for the genius model when it comes to like television production. The same way that our space has been like cultivated in the public sector because the private sector doesn't treat us well, meaning African Americans. And so the way that he was coming at it was, you can't have black media companies without guaranteed contracts from government, from Go Army, and things of the sort. And so, his problem is like to have a president and then not have those kind of commitments to ebony to essence. It takes so many jobs not only out of the black community, but then also what ends up happening is we don't have any black-owned media outlets where we can get our voice out. And so, I definitely see your point, and like I think that people tend to approach Obama, and I was telling you this as well earlier, as though he's a local mayor or alderman, and because that's been our relational point for understanding black politicians, whereby you approach it as though you understand the limitations of his power, when you really should sit down and look at tradition, look at historical presidential uses of power, and then see that there were choices made as far as the agenda that purposely put our interests well behind other interests. When the New Deal happened, that was monumental. Black America needs something like the New Deal, and there's no way after voting for him at the clip that we did for after Stevie Wonder songs during the campaign, that Black America shouldn't have been a primary focus. Black America to me also needs an apology for slavery. It's just insane that where we're at now, leave him leaving office.
Well, it's interesting that you say black people need a New Deal. It's interesting that you say that because there's so many black entrepreneurs who are talking against that kind of thing, and you see that, and that was part of my problem with Farrakhan too, because you see this sort of black capitalistic conservatism where we have this idea that black people don't need government. The only thing black people need is to work harder and take advantage of the dream of capitalism, as if that's available to us. And let me just make this point. The way that these white immigrants who came to America were catapulted to the middle class was because of the New Deal. Yeah. Like if you look at it and you understand that white people couldn't even make it to that point without the New Deal. These white immigrants couldn't make it to that point without the New Deal, without all this help from government. How do you expect black people to make it to that point without that help? With all the extra stuff that's that's flying in against black people, in terms of how the game is played. How do you expect the white people, these white immigrants who look just like everybody else, all these white people made it to the middle class by the New Deal, but you're going to tell me black people can do it by themselves? That tells me, when I hear that you don't have a good understanding of history, because there's no capital available. This kind of thing requires capital. What capital do black people have access to? You just gave me statistics that show that black people, only a minuscule amount of black people have access to, what is it, like $350? And how are you as a black person going to talk to me about that? Because this business takes capital. Silicon Valley ain't giving you no capital. These angel investors and aren't giving you any capital. So who's going to give you the capital to do all this stuff you're talking about?
And it's really interesting that you bring up that point because CNN did this video. I may even play a little clip right here of the most unequal place in America. It's Lake Providence, Louisiana. There's a lake in the middle of Lake Providence, Louisiana. On one side are the blacks, and they have like I think the average black person make like $17,000, is worth next to nothing. On the other side are the white landowners, and I think their median wealth was like 600,000 or some crazy number. And so like you have this hard reality of the impact of slavery and the legacy of this country. But like when you went a step even further, so many of the complaints of this black people get welfare argument as the only government assistance that was given was challenged because you had farmers on the other side that got subsidies to not grow things. And so, you know, you had white farmers on the other side that weren't like stand on your own two kind of people. You know, don't grow that walnut or don't grow, you know, that corn this year. And the government gives you money instead of you growing it. And it's like a trip because Black America, I think, has gotten bamboozled in so many ways. Coming back to like dealing with Obama to look at what he couldn't do without understanding fully what the choices were and what he could do.
No, I agree with you. I think we don't understand. I think, listen, psychologically, we're so predisposed to kind of insulating anybody black from any kind of criticism. I mean, we have to address that. You know, it didn't matter to us. You know, none of that stuff mattered to us in terms of who Obama was, what he represented. You know, what he was putting in place, what policies he was supporting. You know, I remember when he said, you know, one boat lifts all ships, and that was very interesting to me because that was the same thing Mondale said when Reverend Jesse Jackson, you know, had run his campaign, which surprised a lot of people, and he came to Mondale and said, I want some concessions in terms of the black community, and Mondale said, one boat lifts all ships, and that was kind of the BS he gave Jesse Jackson. And you walk around and you see a black president, you know, push that same BS on black people, and black people readily eat it up, you know, and not understanding that that's never the way it is. Like, communities always vote in exchange for something and look for that something after that person gets elected. You have black people who turn blue, who turn red states blue. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I need something for that. I turned that state blue. I came out of record numbers. But when Obama said, hey, one boat lifts all ships, we were like, well, I guess that's the way it works. Not picking up a book and saying, let me see if that's the way it has worked historically, because I don't think so, because that's not how it works.
And what let me say 2 points. I think I'll say the first because the second involves maybe me pulling up a video. But what Black America doesn't understand throughout the Deep South is what they gave up to support him as well. And it will hurt you guys in the South. I mean, every state there was like, let me not say, most states were coalitions before Obama, and now they're red states, red governors, red senators. And so, you know, I don't think there's a full grasp of you were using your last dollar to elect him. So you needed a dollar to produce, and it didn't for you. And it's great that, you know, general things got accomplished, but now you're left with the consequence of not having that dollar. Because, you know, you look at these states across the board. I read an article and sent it to somebody who lives in Atlanta to explain to them, like, when you look at Atlanta and the Hope Scholarship and things that developed, these were things that came out of, you know, coalition models that push people to be centric. That's not true anymore down there. And a lot of that is because of a backlash from Obama, which I don't blame him for. Like, we will live with the consequence with our people down throughout there. Now, as to the second point about ships, it's ironic that you bring that up because I sent you a video about Ali and what Ali said when they said, would you want to be president? And again, I think I'll pull it up. It's very short.
You mentioned President Nixon there. I was reading a piece that Norman Mailer wrote about you recently where he described you as the second most prominent American, second most prominent after Nixon. We might dispute that. But would you like to be president?
No.
No?
No, sir. Too dangerous. Like, in other words, here's a ship. People are dancing on the ship. A lot of money's on the ship. A lot of food's on the ship. And I cannot integrate on the ship. I cannot have equality on the ship. I'm just in the galley working. And I never could get up and see the captain of the ship. Now, All of a sudden, the man tells me, say, come on down, Ali, out of the galley. I want you to come up here and here, have something to drink. What do you want? And giving me #1 spot from the galley to the #1 spot. I said, this ship must be sinking. Why is he?
Section. You know, Ali said, and it was like it's like the '60s, and it's all a joke at that point. You know, and I love Ali because he always has these great ways of dealing with people's lack of awareness and intelligence. He said, imagine that you're on a ship, like cleaning the galley, and they're partying up front, and you know, everybody's white up on the deck, and the captain's white, and then all of a sudden somebody runs down and says, "You want to dry the ship?" He says, "Oh, I want to dry the ship. The ship is crashing." And so like it's like a trip because you know, in so many ways, you start to question, you know, whether Obama was ultimately a solution or the conclusion of like black aspirationalism. So like, you know, I read comments on your page and people always say, well, I've read a couple of them that were really like kind of like cliche, where it's like, as long as Michelle's hair is done really well and her dress is nice, Black America will be okay. And so like, you know, you start dealing with, you know, we move from Cosby to Oprah to, you know, Michael Jordan, and you know, is Obama the conclusion of that aspirationalism? As long as you give us one quote unquote great win, quality of life doesn't need to get better.
Yeah, not for the rest of black people. The quality of life for us doesn't make. We live vicariously through these famous people. So our quality of life, it doesn't matter that your nephew's in jail on a marijuana drug charge. You know what I mean? That he's doing time, and people, other white men in these states are making money off of this as a business. That doesn't matter to you. It doesn't matter that you're making $16,000 a year. You can barely make ends meet. What matters to you is what is reflected back to you from these people. And it's very interesting to me that you use the analogy of we wasted our last dollar on Obama. I would say, like, it's the difference between, let's say you have $5. That's it, that's all you got. And you have a choice to get yourself some food, to make it through to the next day, to nourish yourself and make yourself healthy and make it through to the next day, or you have a choice of buying lottery tickets, And with buying the food, you are actually giving yourself something of value that's going to make it through. And with buying a lottery ticket, you're buying into a dream. And we buy into the dream, it seems like, with my generation, especially, and I think with the ones coming after also, it seems that we will buy the lottery ticket every time. We will buy the lottery ticket. There was an article, and it's just in terms of aspirationalism in general in, like, black communities. There was an article last week that was basically like, said something to the effect of, if you win this Powerball, you could buy Tyler Perry's house or whatever. And it's just like, dude, it's just like, oh my God, people, like, do you understand, like, the likelihood? But we live in, like, this aspirational, and Tyler Perry puts out these videos, and Steve Harvey puts out these videos, and we're like, I'm gonna make it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I did the piece, The Decadent Veil, and I shared that with you before, that we live behind a veil of decadence. And, as long as we look good, it don't matter how we feel and are economically. And the question then becomes, in so many ways, is that the ultimate, like, conclusion of the Obama presidency? As long as we had a black president, then it doesn't matter if any of the core issues were solved, or even for that matter got worse. And let me say that we're having this critique from a place of love and knowledge of Obama, and it's for love for the black community, and it's not about trying to at all bash Obama for me, and I think that black America as a whole really needs to sit back and really, like, you have to read about Obama. If you haven't read his books, if you haven't read the Audacity of Hope, if you haven't read Dreams from My Father, you can't understand this president. He wrote Dreams from My Father, of course, way earlier, and you really got to understand him knowing himself as a Kenyan and traveling back and struggling with coming from Hawaii and then becoming a Chicago organizer to really kind of get a framework for the foundational pillars of his existence. Then I believe that even to go further, I've listened to The Promise. If you haven't, what he promised in his first year to deliver. Of course, Tavis Smiley's Accountable. And then I even try to go with hard critiques. There's Abomination. So I believe that you can't understand nor critique this man without sitting back, reading other people's like views in some length. But like Black America has gotten to a point where they haven't evaluated him fully, nor have they evaluated the presidency, and they don't understand the cost of it all. And I'll give you a chance to segue into that, but after that, I did want to talk about him being Kenyan.
Yeah, I think I just want, the only thing I will add to that is that, part of the reason that we won't, kind of, take a step back and have a sober, assessment of this president is because, our identity as Black people is invested in his success. And so when you make the mistake of investing in this, in any human being, it doesn't just have to be Obama. When you make the mistake of investing yourself and your self-worth into anybody, this is what happens. You're not willing to take a critical look. And that's who we are. This was the first Black president. And we don't want to see this guy as somebody. I mean, I think Black people would a lot of us would have a nervous breakdown if we really thought about, the fact that this first Black president, didn't do anything for Black people, but, may not even have this kind of softness in his heart for African Americans that they felt that he had because of how he performed Blackness in the public space. And that's really what it was. It was a performative thing. Everything from Al Green to singing at the funeral, of the one of the victims of the Charleston, what I call terrorist attack or whatever. That's what he did. These are performative things where he performs Blackness in the public space in order to kind of lull us in. And when you have that, and when you have Black people who are just dying to be validated, because we hear so many bad things about Black people every day, we're dying to be validated, And so when he validates us, we can't help but, see ourselves in him and be like, he's one of us. He's just like us, and he cares about us. And I don't care what you say. I don't care if the facts show that he hasn't done anything. As far as I'm concerned, he cares. And something must have gotten in his way, because for him not to do that, or he would never have done it, because I know his heart. That's how they feel.
Yeah, and that kind of segues us into the second part of this next part of the conversation, which is, Obama as an African American versus a Kenyan American. And so, the dynamic of being African American is so interesting to me. You just never hear somebody that's Central American say, I'm Central American. And so, when you travel to Africa and you see parts of the country that are countries on a continent, on the largest continent in the world by far, and you think about us as defining ourselves by a whole continent that size, it really starts to question what it means and why we're doing that. Dealing with the loss, like literally of culture and land, but also of connection, and how if you don't have that loss of connection, whether you really can truly connect to what people who do have that loss are going through. And so, there was a piece in the New York Times called "Apologize for Slavery," and author Timothy Egan, it's a small section, said, as the son of a Kenyan father and a white mother who died more than a century after slavery ended, Barack Obama has little ancestral baggage on this issue. Yet no man could make a stronger statement about America's original sin than the first president. And what he was calling for Obama to do was deal with the lack of apology for slavery. But in the larger context, he started to deal with this dynamic of Obama being a Kenyan man that grew up in Hawaii, despite the community organizers, which we've seen from white people. I mean, you've seen a white person grow up in New York, all white community, and then go to somewhere and teach. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you understand Black experience. And so you start to deal with something that has been long overdue and wasn't really necessary when we define these characteristics of African America, because immigration levels weren't the same, which is, what is the difference between being a Kenyan American and an African American in the sense of how we use the term African American, and whether that played a predominant role in how he classified himself and literally how he thought about everything,
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is, there's not even just one African American experience, right? Like Oprah's African American experience is a lot different than a African American who's living in an impoverished area, where concentrated poverty, right? So if there's not even one African American experience, how can you tell me that this man who was raised, You know, he spent time in Indonesia, grew up in Hawaii, spent time with his white grandparents in Kansas. How can you tell me that he, you know, has lived, understood, you know, or is anyway anchored in what is a Black American experience? And that's part of the problem, because it's just like this. I don't know what happened. I know he didn't grow up with his father in his life, but I don't, and I know that I don't know why that didn't happen. I'm not going to take the other family's word for it. I don't know why he didn't grow up with his father in his life. But the point of the matter is, that's what happened. You know what I mean? So this is a person who didn't grow up with Black aunties, uncles, grandmamas, and everybody around him, you know, telling him about the good old days or the bad old days or what used to happen back in the day. Like, that is not part of what he learned growing up. And I said a long time ago, you know, that has to factor into his experience. That has to factor into, you know, how he views not only himself, but how he views the African American or Black people in this country, how he views that collective. You know, but people don't want to have that conversation, because you have that conversation, people are like, oh, you're just trying to police Blackness. That's not what I'm saying. I'm trying to actually discern, you know, this man's experience in terms of, and that's what I used to try to do. I used to try to discern, like, how does he view Black people? Like, how does he view Black people in this country? You know, if you remember in Game Change, there was a very interesting segment, I think it was in the second Game Change. Yeah, after Obama had been elected and everything, and they basically said that, listen, Obama dislikes the Congressional Black Caucus, you know, more than he dislikes the Tea Party. Now, how is that possible? Because even though I don't have any love for the Congressional Black Caucus, because I know they're duplicitous and all this other stuff, you know, they have done nothing but support this president. So how could you have so much animosity towards this group of people? They say everybody except John Lewis, he doesn't care for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think Maxine Waters had a problem getting him he came to L.A. and didn't tell her so that she can at least, you know, meet up.
Yeah, he doesn't want to be seen with you. You have gone around and carried this man's water for so long. And then when Maxine Waters did offer what was a very mild criticism of Barack Obama, Black people jumped on her like crazy. But it's just like when you just distill that for a moment, that this caucus of Black people, you know, who has insulated Obama from criticism, has done nothing, you know, to the detriment of their own constituents. They've done this for him, and he doesn't have any love for them. So you can't have, to me, you could not have began for love with these people in the first place. Like, to me, you strike me as a man who's very dismissive of not only this caucus, but a lot of Black people. And I see that when you talk, I see that about the Congressional Black Caucus, I see that in your recent remarks about HBCUs, where you're like, well, we don't want kids dropping out of school, you know, we don't want kids getting out loans. And it's just like, listen, a lot of these HBCUs, you know, take in a disproportionate number of poor Black kids. They're going to have a lot of problems that schools that take in wealthier and whiter students don't have, you know. So just kind of lay that on their feet. And this was, for those who don't know, he made these comments during a Thursday town hall. I think the article's up on yourblackworld.net. You can go take a look at it. But every now and again, you get a glimpse into, you know, Barack Obama, what he's saying. And you get and if a white president had said that, we would have gone insane. We would have gone mad. But because Barack Obama did it, we're just like, well, you know, he's telling the truth. And, you know, we need hard truth. Like, when do Black people need anything else hard? You know what I mean? Like,
no, and I totally get it. And I guess what I love about how you bring it up is I'm bringing up the exact other side, which actually fits like a puzzle piece. So moving away from how he may think, dealing with the actual facts of it, which is how we think about ourselves, and like how he doesn't have to deal with that, and so many like of the nuances of Blackness not being ready to deal with people who don't deal with that. Meaning, when you're Kenyan American, if you read Dreams from My Father, he goes back to Kenya, he knows the village. Like, we as a group are dealing with a lot of loss and identity crisis in terms of actually knowing where we come from, and also swallowing the pill that for multiple generations your family were enslaved. Whole life your family were enslaved. And he doesn't have that. But his presentation is the representation as a Black president, not a Kenyan president, as a Black president, that we've progressed past that. That we've shown progress from that, even if you don't want to accept the word past. And I just find it like interesting that we've had so little dialogue on that dynamic, because it's one of the new, like I guess you could say, hiding places for Black American struggle, which is to not deal with the way that disproportionately failure is affecting Blacks that come from slavery, and the way that success is disproportionately going towards Blacks that are from newer immigration statuses, and partially that's because you don't deal with the lack thereof, whether it be more structural two-parent households, whether it be that, there was this great study, and I use this study because it's a very often dynamic with immigration, which is, everybody's like, oh, Chinese are so smart, Chinese people are so smart. So what they showed in this study was that of all of China, only 2% have college diplomas, but 50% of the people that get to come to America have college diplomas. So my argument is that, no, it's not just that they're two-parent households, that these tend to be the wealthier. When I say wealthy, I'm not saying rich, but wealthier people from their country, whether it be Nigeria, whether it be Ethiopia. And so then it becomes very much easier when you're competing as that person against somebody who's a single mom in Compton, and you check the same black box. And then on top of it, you don't deal with loss instead. So, I think Obama brought out a lot of that discussion, and we just didn't have it. And it was just kind of accepted he's the first Black president, that he's the first African-American president, and that he represented everything that the Black kid in Compton could be, without dealing with the dynamic that even without his father went to Harvard. So when it came time to check alumni, he checked the alumni. Like, his dad was alumni. And, that how at Harvard.
How many Black people go to Harvard and can check that box and say, my dad went to Harvard? How many of us can do that?
And especially in 70 and 79 or 81. Yeah. So, this dynamic, and how much of the application process was that in 81? And so, I think that we didn't deal with, not so, and this isn't to at all, set back the right of a Kenyan American to run for president. It's more so similar to our critique of BLM. It's to say, to do it under the guise of Motown and Stevie Wonder and everything else, you at least owe that group, the Black Caucus, first right. And that's just my position. And so, other people can take the position, well, he's still everybody's president, but I hope that you can eat that when it's time to pay your mortgage. I hope you can eat that when your kids got to go to school and there's no grants. Because right now, that's where we're at. We're at a position where we didn't get enough this last 7 years.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. We have this whole thing of Obama's Black like us, and it's just no, not necessarily. This is no. I couldn't. I'm first generation college. How is he? How is that? How is he? This is somebody who was traveling in Indonesia, who lived in, who had 2 college educated parents and all of that. Are we talking Ivy League? No, we're not. So no, this is somebody who grew up, when he with his grandparents, he was living in a white household in terms of what that means. And so this whole idea.
And you got to realize, even on top of it, and it's funny because even on top of it, when you think about the goals his father had, going back, it's like when you go to Harvard and you come from Kenya, it's like to go back and change the irrigation or or change the government. And so, just having that as a role model versus what so many Black men from the 80s had, which is this distant, father that came from sharecropping or something. And so, you start to deal with this dynamic of, even beyond just knowing that you come from Kenya, it's knowing you come from the best part of Kenya. And I'm not saying that his family didn't have struggles. Don't think I'm saying that, because I know they did. But what I am saying is, the knowledge of identity, the lack of knowledge of identity on the other side for Black Americans separates us on a criteria basis of what we're defining him as an accomplishment of. And I think that it's done a great a great number on Black America really understanding itself in terms of why and what Blackness is, why Blackness is important.
Part of the problem for me is that instead of seeing ourselves through the prism of data about Black people, that's what they are about too. You always pulling the data. Instead of seeing ourselves through the prism of the data that exists and what that reflects back to us as black people, we see ourselves through through the lens of black culture. And that is the problem, because when you see yourself through the lens of black culture, anybody can con you. So Barack Obama can sing Al Green. You had Mayor Nutter up in, what was it, Philly? He can do all of that stuff too. He was doing all of that and singing. He did a lot of that too, and he was the same. But you got emergency managers taking over places, being undemocratic. You got all of that stuff. So the problem is, if you see yourself through the lens of black culture as opposed to like the lens of black data, this is what's real. This is what's real in black life. That's the data. That tells you what black life looks like. That tells you what the terrain looks like, what this battle will look like if you want to fight it. Instead, we see ourselves as through the lens of black culture. So as long as Barack Obama is good at performing blackness, right, we're okay. Like, that's what we look for. And I think until we can start seeing ourselves through that other lens, through that lens that we talk about, which is the lens of black data. I mean, I don't see anything changing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that part of, to give a visual and in data, what you're saying is the lens of black culture is Obama released black prisoners. He's good and done good for blacks. But the reality is that almost 800,000 black men are in prison. I'll bring up the chart now. I've written on it extensively, as much as I've written on wealth, that shows like black men have the highest incarceration rate by tenfold in the like modern world history. One of the highest incarceration rates in the history of the world was 830 per 100,000 in South Africa during apartheid. Right now, today, as good as your life is, whoever's watching this video, black men are incarcerated at a rate of 10,000 per 100,000. Young black men, 20 to 39. 850,000 or so are in prison or jail, and he let out 6,600. And I think that we really got to a point where, on a black cultural level, we celebrate it. Same thing goes for your My Brother's Keeper.
Yeah.
He came out with My Brother's Keeper, and he said it. But we didn't break down that there's no government funding. We didn't break down that this isn't a policy that got set up as a government necessity. It was like a pet project kind of thing, and hopefully some private companies come in and give $2 or $3 million. But we're talking about, when you look at the incarceration number I just gave to you, cataclysmic, like failure type issues that are being addressed with pet projects. And so, like, when you start to like really connect these things, what you walk away with is that black culture can be conned, but black numbers cannot. And so as a result, politicians, leaders become very good and adept at tiptoeing and tipping the scale around black culture to play with your mind.
Yeah, and that's what, and it works. And we see it. Let's not just talk about Obama. It goes back to everything. It goes back a long way. But you can look at Clinton playing the saxophone on the Arsenio Hall show. It's all didn't Hillary Clinton nay not too long ago? I don't know how well that worked out. But the truth of the matter is this stuff works. Like we want to feel understood. It's almost like the people, the politicians and the people, these people are our therapists or something. And that's how they exist in our minds in terms of how they validate us, as opposed to people who are there to bring to us real resources that we can use: food, water, housing, capital. All that stuff is what we need. But we use it to feel some sort of emotional need. It's almost like I said, our politicians are our therapists, and we had to get out of that. Like, this is not where we're supposed to be, because every serious demographic, every demographic that takes themselves seriously is looking for money. So politics is nothing but the splitting up of resources. That's all it is. It's not about singing. It's not about any of that. It's about how these federal dollars are spent. Who gets it? Who gets that? You know what I mean? Who gets the money? Like, that's politics. How are we going to cut up that pie? When those tax dollars come in here, how do we cut it up? That's it. If you're not talking to me about that, I don't care.
So, and it's funny because, people sometimes, they can hear you, and I actually think that they can walk away and think that you're not optimistic, or you're speaking to something that is a doomsday situation, when actually, if they really understood like where Black America's at numerically, you might be actually relatively positive versus the real numbers. And so I just wanted to read this one section from an older book called The Political Economy of the Black Ghetto. And this is what the author says. He says, the economic relations of the ghetto to white America closely parallel those between the third world nations and the industrially advanced countries. The ghetto also has a relatively low per capita income and a high birth rate. Its residences are for the most part unskilled. The ghetto is dependent on one basic export: it's unskilled labor. And so, like, I mean, you start to understand this greater dynamic to exactly what you're speaking to, and like then starting to be able to question local level. And that's why I love this book, and I recommend it to everybody. I mean, everybody has their feelings about Travis, but it's a powerful book because what it does is that it actually breaks down what the promises were by politicians, both at the national, local, and even in your home level, and how you make covenants, and then how you demand that they actually fix those things. And so, like, we didn't really do that with Obama, and we don't really do that with ourselves. Let me give an example. Like, he has a section here about the economy. He has Obama's promises, and then he has the congressmen and congresswomen, and then he comes down to your home level. Then he has these check boxes where he actually says questions. So, like, our president on the economy, have you made the implementation of your economic plan a priority within the first 100 days of the new administration? Are you implementing your planned tax reform as promised during your campaign? Have you addressed pressing financial issues? And these are all check boxes. And he does this all the way down to the home level, you and I, which he says, do you read the business section of the newspaper? Do you prepare a monthly budget and stick to it? Do you monitor your credit report? And so, you know, I really feel like we as black people got to get out of the economy and get to the numbers. The only problem I see for us is that the numbers won't be. It's kind of like if you have stage 3 cancer, and I know people are going to say, dang, you're comparing black people, but it's kind of like you got to go to the hospital, though, and you got to get checked out. And so, like, black America, a lot of times, I think because the numbers are so bad, just say, I don't want to check my credit, or, you know, I understand my mom's poor, but I'm going to do this anyway. And you got to start being honest about, like, where we're at structurally, even based on the numbers I showed you earlier, and pull that chart back up and look where black America is at financially. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably going to be, I'm probably just going to leave it here. It's probably be the last word for me, but it's just like, you know, you have to, I'm a firm believer that you have to be honest. It's not about, and it's, you know, black people have this sort of faith-based approach to politics, and that everything's going to be all right if I just stay the course. And, you know, I think what we see is that that's just not true. Like you see, I saw some data the other week about, you know, we're talking about the unemployment rate and how, you know, a lot of Latinos their unemployment rate is less. And listen, this idea that we can just ignore it and have faith, you know, we're being decimated.
No. And let me tell you one more thing about that point. It's funny because, and I know you have some other things you have to do. It's interesting because what Black America doesn't understand is that, like, when the Grio did an analysis of the top 1% and then tried to break it down, top 1% of America in wealth, you know, 96% of the top 1% was white, 1% was black, and 1% was Latino, like 1.3%, 1.4%. Very small numbers. But what was interesting was when they looked at, and you know, these are private numbers, so you know, they're trying to get them as accurate as possible. The median wealth of the groups. So the median wealth for the blacks of the best black group was like $1.4 million. That was the median wealth of the top tier. The median wealth for the 96% of whites was like $8 million. What I will say on the end is, like, when we look back, and News One did, and this is the last thing as well for me, did a analysis of his top 5, Barack Obama's top 5 accomplishments for Black America, and their 5 were: 1, he awarded $1.2 billion to black farmers. Number 2, which you'll have he expanded funding for HBCUs. Number 3, he signed the crack cocaine bill, which wasn't again retroactive. Number 4, passed health care reform. And number 5, created the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. And so, you know, it's interesting because I do think that we as Black Americans, just really as we start to end this last year of Barack Obama's presidency, as we listen to the State of the Union, just really need to look at like how these 8 years affected you individually and affected us across the board, and start to question whether, you know, we got enough for how much we cried in '08 and how much we said we're going to stick by you in 12 and where we're at here now in 16. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I think you're right. I think this deserves a part two, too.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
No problem.